If you're building or maintaining an API, you need to provide documentation for that API. In this video, I'm going to show you how to build documentation with Swagger. So what will you learn by watching this video? You'll learn how to add the Swagger UI to your ExpressJS API. You'll learn how to export Swagger docs as JSON. You'll learn how to use OpenAPI to define your API documentation. And you'll learn how to import the Swagger docs to Postman. So who is this video for? This video is for anyone that is building an API. Before I go on to the demo, please make sure you have joined our Discord. You'll find the link in the description below, and you can ask any programming questions, and you can also request videos. And shout out to AZAH who requested this video here. This is what we're going to be building. So you can see we have our REST API docs, and we have a few endpoints here. We have health check, and we can click try it out, execute this, and we get back a 200 OK. We have a post request to create a user, and we have a get request to get a single product. You'll notice here that this is not all the endpoints for our REST API. If you would like to contribute to the repository and add an endpoint, that would be a great contribution and some really good practice for you, and you'll get a shout out in a video. If you would like to follow along, I'm going to be building off the back of this repository here. And we built this repository out in a series of videos that you'll be able to find in the playlist for this video. So let's get started building these Swagger docs. The first thing I'm going to do is to open up the source directory, and I come into this utils folder, and I'm going to create a new file, and I'll call this swagger.ts. And inside of this file, I'm going to import from Express. I'm going to import Express, request, and response. And these are all just interfaces. I'm going to import Swagger.js doc from Swagger.js doc. And we're going to need to install this package here. I'm going to import Swagger UI from Swagger UI Express. So we're going to use Swagger.js doc to build out the Swagger documentation. And then we're going to use Swagger UI Express to expose that documentation in an interface. I'm also going to import the version from our package.json, and this is so we can put our version on the docs. So I'm going to import version as a named export. And you can see here that we cannot import a .json file because we need to use resolve.js module. So if we come into our tsconfig here, you can see that we have resolve.json module, and we have this commented out. So if we set this to true and save, this error here will go away. And I'm also going to import our logger. So import log from /logger. Let's install these two modules here. Now and add Swagger.js doc and Swagger UI Express. And we also need to install the definitely typed packages for these two. I'm going to yarn add types /Swagger UI Express and @types /Swagger.js doc. And I'm going to save those as development dependencies. Okay, so now we can start building out our options. I'm going to say const options equals, and this is just going to be an object, and we can type these options here. We can say Swagger.js doc dot options. Say definition, and I'm going to give this an OpenAPI version of 3.0.0. I say 3.0.0. I'm going to provide some info, and the title is just going to be REST API docs. The version is going to be our version from our package.json. So when you bump your package.json, your API doc versions will be bumped as well. Let's add some components here. So I'm going to say components. And say security schemas. And say bearer auth. And this is because we're using a bearer token for our authentication. I say type is HTTP. Scheme is bearer. And our bearer format is going to be JWT. So the next parameter here is going to be security. And then this is going to be an array, and our first parameter is going to be bearer auth, and this is just going to be an empty array. So how you configure this part here is just going to depend on how you have your authentication set up. So the next parameter here, and if I collapse this, you can see exactly where this goes. This goes under definition. We're going to say APIs. And this is going to be an array of paths to where your OpenAPIs are defined. So I'm going to define mine in the routes file. So in here, I'm going to define all the definitions for these routes. And I'm also going to define some in schemas. I'm going to find these in here. So I need to define where these are going to go. So I need to say it's going to go in routes and schemas. A ./source/routes.ts and ./source/schema/ and star.ts. So we need to now create a spec. I'm going to say const swagger spec is equal to swagger JS doc, and we're going to pass in our options. Now we need to create a function to expose some endpoints. I'm going to say function swagger docs. And this function is going to take two arguments. The first argument is going to be our app, and this is going to be of type express. And then the second argument is just going to be our port number. And this is just so we can log out where the docs are. So I'm going to define two endpoints. The first one is going to be the Swagger page. And then the second one is going to be the docs in JSON format. I'm going to do this with app.use, and I'm going to put mine on /docs. And then I'm going to say Swagger UI.serve. I'm going to say Swagger UI.setup. And then I'm going to pass in the Swagger spec. So for the next route, I'm going to say app.get, and I'm just going to put this one on docs.json. I'm going to provide a callback here. I'm going to have a request and a response object, and we imported the interfaces here, so I can say request and response. But I need to set the content type here to application JSON, so I'm going to say res.setHeader content type. I'm going to set this to application/JSON. Then I'm just going to send out the docs. I'm going to say res.send Swagger spec. And let's just add a logger here. So I'm going to say log.info. Say docs available at HTTP localhost. And then I'm going to put the port /docs. The one cool thing that we do with the Swagger docs in my current position is in our build pipeline, we build the documentation and then we publish it to Postman. And then that becomes available to all of our clients and developers. automatically. So I just need to export this function, export default, Swagger docs. Let's come to our app.ts, and I'm going to import Swagger docs from /utils/swagger. And then when we start our server, I'm just going to execute this function here, and I'm going to pass in our app, and I'm going to pass in the port. So to start this server, you do need a running instance of MongoDB. So I'm going to type yarn dev, and you can see here our app is now running, our database is connected, and our docs are available at localhost 1337/docs. Let's open these up. And you can see we have some empty documentation. So let's go back and we can come into routes. And let's define some documentation for this health check endpoint. So I'm going to use some comments here. I'm going to say at OpenAPI. And these comments are in YAML format. So we need to provide the path here. So I'm going to say /health_check. And then the route is going to be get. And I'm going to provide a tag here. And this tag is going to group the endpoints in our documentation. I'll point that out later on. And the tag that I'm going to give it is just health check. We can also give this a description. And the description is just going to be responds if the app is up and running. So this endpoint is only going to have one response, and that response is going to be a 200. I'm going to say responses, and then I'm going to say a 200. And then this is just going to mean that the app is up and running. So I'm going to say description, app is up and running. Save that. We come over to our documentation. Now you can see that we have this health check endpoint here, and it takes no parameters. And we have 200. So let's try it out. We can execute this. You can see here we get back a 200 OK. So the next endpoint that we will document is this one here to create a user. So you can see we have a post request on /API/users. So let's do something very similar. So I'm going to do our comments here. I'm going to type at OpenAPI. And then I'm going to provide the route. So it's going to be /API/users. Then I'm going to do a full colon. And you may think to do this for all of our routes is going to be very tedious, and you would be absolutely correct. However, having these inside of your routes is going to be really handy for other developers, because you can look at a route and you can see exactly what it's going to take and what it should respond with. And you get that on top of your documentation that can be publicly facing, or it can be used by front-end developers as well. So this is going to be a post endpoint. So I'm going to say post. I'm going to do another full colon. Tab in, and I'm going to do tags. And our tag here is going to be user. I'm going to do a summary. And the summary is just going to be register a user. Then I'm going to have a request body. And the request body is going to be required. So I'm going to say required is true. And our contents is going to be application JSON, because we expect our request body to be in JSON format. Then I'm going to say schema. So if we come back to our documentation now, we can collapse our health check, and we have this new group here called user. And so user is going to match our tags here. So you can see we have a tag for health check, and now we have a tag for user. And you can see we have a post request for /API/user, and we have a description here for registering a user. But we don't have a request body example. So let's define a schema for this request body. Let's come into the user schema, and you can define this inside of the user model if you like. But I think this is a better place to do it if you're using these schemas, because this defines all the input for validation. So I'm going to put these comments again. I'm going to do @OpenAPI, and I'm going to say components, say schemas, and then I'm going to say create user input. The type is going to be an object. And if I put my cursor here and press Shift Command down, I can create a new item on the same row. I'm going to say required. And then inside of required, I'm going to put all the fields that are going to be required for this input. I'm going to put email, name, and password. And I'm also going to put password confirmation. So we have our body down here. So you can see we have name, password, password confirmation, and email. So they should all be required fields. Now we're going to define the properties. I'm going to say properties, put a colon, and I'm going to say email. The type is going to be a string. And I'm going to put a default value here as well. So I'm going to say default. And this is just going to be jane.doe@example.com. And then I'm going to highlight all of this, and I'm going to press my Shift Command down. And I'm going to do this 3 times. So I can create one for each of these. So I'm going to say name. The example here is just going to be Jane Doe. Say password and confirm password. And the example here is just going to be strong password 123. That, and put this in the password confirmation. So now let's come back to our routes, and we should be able to reference this create user input schema. So inside of the schema, I'm going to use this $ ref, and then I'm going to say hash / components / schemas / create user input. So if we come back over to our documentation here, you can see we have some example values, and this is going to have our default values here. So let's define some responses here. So you can see we have request body. So in line with request body, we need to add our responses. So I'm going to say responses. And our first response is going to be a 200. And if we get a 200, this is just going to be success. So I'm going to say description, success, and then I'm going to have content. And then the content is going to be application JSON. And then this should have a schema. And so we need to create another reference here for our create user response schema. Before we do that, let's do our other responses. So I'm just going to press my Command Shift down here. And then I'm going to say this one is a 409. And this is going to be a conflict, which means the user already exists. And that's all we're going to have for that. Then we're going to have one more, and this is just going to be a 400. And this is going to be a bad request. Let's come back to our user schema here, and you can see we have create user input. So let's define our create user response. So I'm going to highlight all of this, and I press Command Shift down, I can get a copy of it. And this is going to be create user response. And it's going to be an object. I'm going to remove the entire required block. And then the properties, we're going to have email. We're not going to have a default for that. We're going to have name. And we're not going to return the password or confirm password. Let's remove those. However, we are going to return an ID. And we're going to return a created and updated at date. So created at and updated at. Let's copy this create user response. Come down here. And the schema that we're going to return is going to be $ref hash / components / schemas / create user response. So we can come back to our documentation, and you can see here that we have a success response, we have a 400 bad request, and we have a 409 conflict. And if we get a 200, this is the response that we should expect. So let's try this out. So you can click try it out here, and you can click execute. And you can see here we got a 400 bad request. There's password confirmation is required. And if you have a look here, we have password confirmation, which is a little bit different to password confirmation. So let's go fix that. I'm back to our documentation, and this looks a little bit better. So let's click try it out again. I'm going to execute this. And you can see we got a 409 conflict because this user has already been created. So we can edit the request here. So I can say +1. I can execute again. And this time we got a 200 and we get our response back here. So I could show you how to create a schema for every single route here, but I think that might be a little bit boring. So I'm just going to show you a variety. And from there, you should be able to create a definition for every single route in your API. The next one I'm going to do is for this get a product. And this one's a little bit different because we have a product ID in the params here. So I'm going to open up our comments. I'm going to do at OpenAPI. And the route is going to be /API /products / and then we're going to use curly brackets. So I'm going to say product ID and then close the commas here. And this is going to be a GET request. I'm going to give it some tags. And the tag that I'm going to give it is products, because this route relates to our products. I'm going to say summary, get a single product by the product ID. Say parameters. So you could define this in a schema as well, but I'm going to show you how to define it inside of the docs here instead of doing this ref like we did up here. So I'm going to say name, and we're going to name the parameter here. So it's going to be product ID. I'm going to provide an in property, and it's going to be in the path. I'm going to say description, and we don't need these dashes here. Highlight those and press tab. The ID of the product. The required is true. So now that we've defined the route with the parameter, let's save that. Back to our documentation here, and you can see we have a GET request for a product with a product ID in the route. So we can click try it out, and we can provide a product ID. So I can say 123. I can execute that, and you can see we get no response here. So let's define some responses for this request. So I'm going to say responses. $200. I'm going to give this a description. And the description is just going to be success. And then I'm going to say content. And our content is going to be application JSON again. And then I say schema. Then I'm going to say $ref. And then I'm going to define this schema in our schemas file here for products. I'm going to say hash / components / schemas / product. And if we don't get a 200, then we will get a 404. So I'm going to say 404, and then the description is product not found. And I can remove all of this. So let's go define our product schema inside of this product.schemas. Open the comments again. Open API, components, schemas. It's going to be product. And so this product here needs to match this product here. You can see we're defining the path here, components, schema, product. Come over here, components, schema, product. And the type is going to be an object. Required. We're going to have title, description, price, and image. And then under required, we're going to have properties. And these properties are just going to match here, but we're going to be able to give them a type. I'm going to say title. And the type is going to be string. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to copy it down, do description, price, and the price is going to be a number. And then image is also going to be a string. Come back to our documentation, and you can see here that we now have our response here of 200, and we have a 404 not found. Let's try this. So you can click try it out, give it a product ID, click execute. And you can see here we get our 404. One little tip is that if you don't see the expected values here, or if your route doesn't appear on the page here, it's probably to do with your indenting. So I can come back here and I can ruin the indents here on tags. And if we come back, you can see that the route just disappears altogether. So make sure your indenting is correct and make sure your references are correct as well. So if we call this products, for example, and we refresh here, and if I open up our product, you can see we get this error here, could not resolve reference. And it's because this is called products here, where we've actually called it product in the schema. So before we close out, before we made a JSON endpoint here. So let's copy that and we can come back over to our docs. And let's go over to the JSON endpoint, and you can see here we get a bunch of JSON. And this is really handy if you want to import your docs into Postman. Let's open up Postman. And in Postman, you can go to File, Import, click Raw Text, and you can paste the JSON from that JSON endpoint. Click Continue, and you can see we have REST API docs, and the format is OpenAPI version 3.0. Click Import. Click Close. And if you come to collections, you can see here we have REST API docs. And if you go into API, you can see the collections that we made. And then there's some examples here as well of success, bad request, conflict, success, and health check. So that is how to add Swagger docs to your REST API. If you like this video, please make sure you like and subscribe, and make sure you've joined the Discord so you can ask questions and request videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.